A reading from the Gospel of Mark. Then he went home, and the crowd came together again, so they could not even eat. When his family heard it, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, "He has gone out of his mind." And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He has Beelzebul, and by the ruler of the demons he cast out demons." And he called them to him and spoke to them in parables. How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, the house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly, I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins, and whatever blasphemies they utter, but whoever blasphemies against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they had said, "He has unclean spirit." Then his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, "Your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside asking for you." And he replied, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Let's begin with the word of prayer. Well, Lord, here we are, your brothers and sisters, hungry for a word from you today that will speak to our lives and our situation. Perhaps we have faced criticism at work or at home, as you did. Perhaps we have longed to do something great with our life, as you did. Perhaps we have longed to toss our cap over a wall, as you did in a grand and great way. And so be with us this morning as we think about these things. Amen. President John F. Kennedy's hero and maternal grandfather was John Honeyfitz Fitzgerald, pictured there on the screen. He became the mayor of Boston. Young John Kennedy loved to hear stories that Honeyfitz told about his childhood in Ireland. And one of these stories concerned how Honeyfitz used to walk home each day from school with his buddies. And sometimes those young Irish boys, as they tend to do, challenged each other to do something kind of out of the box or beyond what was wise to do in the eyes of their mothers, namely to climb over stone walls that towered above them along the lanes in the countryside. And there were times when they weren't so sure about this, how to do that, if they could screw up the courage. And so the boys devised a way of doing it. They would toss their caps over the wall. And they knew that they dare not go home and face their Irish mothers without those caps. So they had to climb over the walls to get the cap and then climb back over. They tossed the cap over the wall as a way of motivating themselves to take a big risk. There are times in our lives where we long to toss our caps over the wall, so to speak, whether it may be leaving home after graduating from high school or maybe college, going into the military, as the songs this morning spoke of, changing jobs after being in one job for a long time. You're nice and secure there, good benefits. Going back to school, perhaps as a young person you didn't have that opportunity, but later in life you think, it's not too late, time to throw my cap over that wall. Or just walking down an aisle like this on your wedding day. That's throwing a cap over a wall. There are times in life where we need to do this, to take a gamble, take a risk, stretch ourselves. And sometimes we become famous as a result. There was a pilot from a small town in Minnesota, Little Falls, I think, called Charles Lindbergh, who once threw his cap over a wall. You know his story, how he flew his little wooden plane solo across the Atlantic without stopping. As he was leaving the last stretches of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, he kept looking down on the forests and on the lakes and the land and thinking, well, if I have an emergency, I can drop down there or I can land in that little lake there. But soon there were no more clearings. There were no more lakes. There was no more land. He was over the ocean, and he'd thrown his cap over the wall. And yesterday was the anniversary of D-Day, where thousands of brave soldiers and sailors and airmen tossed their caps over the wall to save Europe. They left behind what was comfortable and dropped into France in the night in parachutes or fought their way onto the beaches in the morning. And there is one young man in particular who decided to make a life-changing move. You've all heard of him. He was 30 years old at the time, about the right time to do that, owned a successful small business which had been left him by his father. He was respected by his friends and loved by his family, but he knew that this was not where he belonged. He felt called to something greater, to a ministry of teaching and preaching and healing. And so he threw his cap over the wall. At first, he met with spectacular success. His reputation spread. But as his popularity increased, so did his critics, especially in his hometown. His family was concerned about him, and perhaps they were concerned about their own reputation. Having a person like this coming from their family, what would people say about them in little Nazareth? But he persevered in this new calling for 3 years, but then died an untimely death on a Roman cross. And as he hung on that tree between two thieves, dying a cruel death, no one looking at that day would have said that this is a success, that this is a successful life. But it was. It was the greatest life that was ever lived. For all of this, took place 2,000 years ago when Jesus tossed his cap over the wall. And we're here today because he did it. No one accomplishes anything substantial without criticism. Jesus had his critics. In today's gospel, you hear about him. His ministry is just getting started. However, people are starting to take note of him already, for good and bad. He's chosen his 12 disciples, his small group, as it were. The crowds are growing by the day. Momentum is building toward a magnificent ministry, but almost right out of the gate, he runs into opposition. First from his own family, of all people. Mark says that when Jesus' family heard about what Jesus was up to and what was happening, they went to kind of rein him in because people were saying he is out of his mind. Can you imagine that? Jesus' family wanted to shut it down and take him back to the carpentry shop. Enough of this nonsense, they were thinking. And sometimes it is those closest to us, our own blood relatives, who have the hardest time with whatever we end up doing in life. When we throw our cap over the wall, sometimes it's our parents or grandparents or siblings who wonder if we know what we're doing, if we're a little out of our mind. Why are you moving away from home? Why are you leaving your comfortable nest? Or sometimes our criticism comes from our colleagues. In Jesus' case, it was the local clergy association. They were called the teachers of the law, the seminary faculty who came down from Dubuque to check him out, check out his theology and say, hey, there's something not right here. You need to rein it in. They even said to anyone who listened, he is possessed by the devil, by Beelzebul, by the prince of demons. He is driving out demons. Probably some seminary faculty have thought that of some of their graduates over the years. That's the way life is. One author has called it the Salk theory. Jonas Salk, remember him? The great doctor of medicine who pioneered polio research in the late 40s and early 50s, discovered the polio vaccine. Did you know he had a legion of critics that he dealt with over the years? And at one point, someone from a magazine asked him about all the critics that he had, and he made an interesting observation about them, which seems to hold true for any of you who kind of think outside the box and try to do something innovative. Salk said, first, people will tell you that you are wrong. Then they will tell you that you are right, but what you're doing really isn't important. Finally, they will admit that you are right and that what you are doing is very important, but after all, they knew it all the time. And you know, often the most courageous thing that we can do in life, the ultimate throwing the cap over the wall, is to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. All too often we confuse that with church membership. But to become a disciple is to become more than just a member. It is to throw your cap over a wall, to move from a belief in God, which over 90% of Americans have anyway, to a real radical conviction of the heart. It's to move from a kind of an acquaintance with God to a deep commitment of your life. Many of you know Noel Paul Stuckey, the Paul of Peter, Paul, and Mary. At one point in his life, Stuckey was going through a time of crisis and searching, struggling with the hypocrisy in his life. He turned to an old friend for advice, an old friend from Greenwich Village in New York City named Bob Dylan. What a guy to get advice from. I think this was in the 70s when Dylan was kind of in his own sort of emergence into Christianity. And Dylan said, do two things, Paul. Go for a long walk in the country, get out of the city, and secondly, read the Bible. Read the Bible. And so Paul took his advice. He went for that long walk in the country, which helped him sort out his head a little bit. And then he started reading the Bible, which he had never done before. In the 60s, as he sang those folk songs with Peter Yarrow and Mary Travers, many of them which had their roots, in the Scriptures, he had never bothered to open the Scriptures. But now he did, and read through the entire New Testament and parts of the Old, the ones he could make sense of. He had a hard time with a lot of that Bible, mysterious, hard to figure out, but the Gospels really rang true for him. And something happened in his life there in the 70s or so, and today he is a living disciple of Jesus Christ. His song, The Wedding Song, which was very popular in many weddings in the 80s and 90s, was written during that time when he threw his cap over the wall. Is it time for you to throw your cap over some wall? What are the walls that seem too high for you to climb, as they did for little Honey Fitz back in his childhood in Ireland? Here's a few possibilities for you, and I'd like you to kind of talk to somebody next to you and think about, what's your wall these days? For some people, it's service. And they say it's just safer to come here on a Sunday morning for an hour and then go straight home and not do anything else during the week. Or they may think, I feel like I don't have much to offer in serving others. What good am I? I don't have anything anybody else needs. That's how some people think. Or for some people, it's giving that is the wall. Making a financial commitment, like to simply giving. Or in the fall when we have our annual fund appeal. Or just a weekly offering is hard for me to do. I don't know what's coming next week with bills, possibly. I'm afraid to share or give something up. Or for some, it's weekly worship. Just look around. We had 1,200 people here on Easter. And in these summer days, we'll range around 400 people, give or take. Our kids are just too busy with sports or music or fill in the blank. Or we just like to relax on Sunday mornings, read the paper, go out for breakfast. Or, number 4, something else. What's the wall for you that you have trouble throwing your cap over? Take a little moment, would you, and just share that with someone next to you. What might be a wall for you? Go ahead. There was once a church secretary who put a sign on the wall beside her office, photocopied it. The sign read, "You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps." And on a deeper level, there's a lot of truth to that when you're a Christian. There's something strange about this place and about this lifestyle we call you to. In the church, we do and say things that don't always make a lot of sense to people outside of this place. The things that are listed there on the screen, like serving, and giving and weekly worship. And in that way, when you try to follow those things, you're not much different than Jesus. In his day, people were saying he's gone out of his mind. And perhaps somebody has said that about you once or twice. His family came to try and pull him in, rein him in, bring him back to his senses before he embarrassed himself or embarrassed them in their small town. Perhaps someone's tried to do that with you as well, as they sense that you were getting a little too committed to this place or to your Lord Jesus. And they tried to pull you back to sanity in their minds. But as you throw your cap over the wall, because of your love for Jesus, he says a word to you at the end today. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and my mother. And you know, that's quite a compliment. That's worth climbing a wall. Amen.